Hi, everyone. Stephen Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant with another episode of Living the Wildlife with the Pest Geek podcast family. Well, we have today Dr. Tim Hiller. We don't get too many PhDs on this program, so we're really going to get geeky today with you, everybody. So he is Dr. Tim Hiller, Executive Director of the Wildlife Ecology Institute based here in Helena, Montana, but we don't hold that against him being in Helena, because that is the capital of our great state. Kind of pretty, but it could be worse. I guess if you get out of the city, it gets prettier. But anyways, we're glad to have you here, Tim. Welcome to the Pest Geek podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little about yourself. Of course, we go back to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln when you were a postdoc there. So tell us about your organization and what you're doing.
Yeah, so soon after doing my postdoc, I left that position and worked for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife as their fur bearer carnivore coordinator. So I was immersed in a lot of different topics, a lot of controversial topics included within there, as you can imagine, with Western carnivores and also with fur bearers and trapping and such. That was a great experience. Certainly having the management perspective has made me a much better researcher. When I left that position, I went back into academic research. And between those two positions, and even before then, I really started to get a little disappointed with some of the research coming out of academia. And so, their merit system is based off publish or perish and high impact theoretical journals and all that sort of thing. I'm a very down to earth kind of guy, applied research and stuff like that. What can we use? What can managers use? So that's kind of where, was the impetus behind me looking into what can I do about this? So in 2015, for lack of a better way to put it, I got fed up and I took the plunge, had a couple kids late in life, but, got a young family and took the plunge and took the risk. And here we are 5 years later, working on, a lot of different projects, including fur bear related ones, and couldn't be happier. And we continue to gain a lot of traction, I'm happy to say. So I think the next couple of years are going to be pretty darn good for us too.
Yeah, so just to sort of help our audience, so you are a nonprofit organization that is contracted out by state agencies, primarily, I would suspect, to do research on their behalf to answer certain questions that they need to have answered for their management goals. Does that sound about right?
Yep, that sounds right. A lot of state agencies, some federal work, we do some endangered species work, for example, black-footed ferrets.
Yeah.
So we work with a lot of agencies. We do work with some with other NGOs. We work with some selected like-minded academics to help fill in some gaps that we may have on certain projects. So it's pretty well-rounded. We're all about partnerships and especially with state agencies, since that's been, a strong background of mine as far as, what do you need, and working at them from beginning to end of the project to make sure everything's going the way it should.
So what sparked my interest in having you on the show was that you were doing some research in Indiana, as I recall, on gray fox, and it seems that there's not a lot known about gray fox. It seems when you compare it with how much research is done on other species. So what exactly are you doing out there?
Well, it's really interesting. So gray foxes are distributed throughout much of the continental United States, except the northern Rocky Mountains. There are no gray foxes in Montana, for example. They get on, they're over in Oregon where I was on the west side and stuff like that. So the biggest concern in the Midwest is, well, all the landscape change, right? That looked very different, a couple hundred years ago. Indiana in 1800, we think it had around 20 million acres of forest. The whole state's 23 million acres.
Wow.
So it was almost all forested. Then, 100 years later, 1900, we think it had about 1.5 million. So that's a substantial loss of forest. Then we come back around to today, and it bumped up maybe around 5 million, but that's still a huge land use change.
Right.
And that's even more prevalent in some other, Midwestern states. So the gray fox being a species that relies on kind of woody, brushy structure and such. Doesn't do well in, intensive, extensive agricultural areas. It's really starting to hit the radar these past couple of years. So that was kind of the impetus. The Indiana DNR and a couple other agencies, we had multiple conversations, and we got this project up and going in Indiana.
So why does the gray fox need that type of cover? Is it for safety to keep from getting killed by coyotes, or is it a prey base issue? Does anybody know?
That's a good question. So what can a gray fox do that no other canid, at least in the United States, can do?
Well, they climb exactly. Trees. Okay.
Yep. And so they've evolved to do so to escape. And, with the land use changes in Indiana, we think that the gray fox is the only native canid in Indiana. The coyotes and the red foxes moved in after settlement. So they're much smaller than these other canid species.
Really?
And, they, as we've talked about, they climb trees probably primarily to escape. And so there's all these factors going on. Undoubtedly, habitat loss and fragmentation is going to be a part of it. But, what's it mean that coyotes have moved in? Are coyotes, directly killing a lot of them? Are they directly competing with coyotes and red foxes? What happens with bobcats starting, population recovery in the Midwest? Raccoons are everywhere now. So is canine distemper becoming a problem because they serve as a reservoir for that sort of disease? There's a lot of different issues going on. So we're trying to disentangle that. And to do a good job at it, this is just a phenomenal project in scope, simply because I'm not aware of any gray fox project that's anywhere near this big. This would be a big project for white-tailed deer or, a more popular species.
So what are you doing? Are you doing just a population census and you're just trying to do a lot of trapping with, what do you use? Are you trapping? Are you using cameras? How are you evaluating population densities?
Well, the first thing we're doing is we've got two study sites, one in the central part of the state that's mostly ag and private land. And then down south near Kentucky, we've got another study site, multiple counties that's mostly forested still, has a better population of gray foxes undoubtedly, and some public land. So we're looking at things like survival, what's affecting survival, reproduction, habitat use, diseases, parasites, and we're even collecting genetic information to look at, okay, are these individuals in the central part of the state and elsewhere, are they isolated from other, the southern population? So this involves, so many factors involved. We are doing captures. So first and foremost, we're relying on trappers. So the trapping season obviously is underway right now. So if a trapper in either of those two study sites, one, in central or the southern part of the state, captures a gray fox, and for example, it's almost surely going to be a foothold, at least most of the time. So if they capture one, we've got a hotline number, and I'm happy to share that. They give us a call, and we are one of our two or both of our field ecologists that are stationed there in Indiana go out and immediately process it. So that means they sometimes the trappers moved it to a cage trap or something like that, which is great. And so we drug it, we put a GPS collar on it, and we collect blood and tissue samples and measurements and all kinds of things for everything from genetics to disease surveillance. We let the fox go, and then we start collecting location data from that collar, and we can also even collect we can tell if that fox, we can tell from the signal on the collar if the collar hasn't moved for 4 hours or more. So that either means the fox is dead or the collar has fallen off and hasn't moved. So
they even move when they're sleeping then?
More than once per 4 hours, yeah.
No kidding. Yeah. Okay. So is this a satellite? Is it satellite, or you have to go out with the wand and the antenna to find where they are?
Well, we don't have satellite download capabilities for a collar that small yet. You can get them for bobcats now. That's becoming more popular. But we have what's called it's kind of the traditional VHF system where you can get a signal and then do it from different spots to triangulate. But we only use it to monitor for mortality, because if that collar hasn't moved for 4 hours or more, it'll put off a faster, instead of going beep, 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 it'll go beep, 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 beep. and then we follow that signal in with a directional antenna. Walk in. We have to get permission if it's on private land, of course.
Right.
But it's really a GPS collar that collects data from satellite positions, right? So it records those data on board, and we have what's called a base station, which is really just a really small, almost smartphone-sized unit with an antenna on it. So once we get a VHF signal, we know we're getting close to within range, and then we can switch over to this UHF or ultra-high frequency system, and it pulls the data off the collars.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Okay, so you're able to, so you don't have to get the collar in your possession to get the data off. You can extract it. Oh, right. Very nice. How long does the battery last?
It depends on how you set the collar up as far as when the VHF is active, how many locations you're taking per day, how often it retries. If it's cloudy cover, the fox is underground. We've got about a year's worth of data we can collect. I believe we've got it on every 7-hour rotation. So every 7 hours, it's attempting to take a.
So given the lawsuit happy world we live in, is that something that affects how your design of this research? Are you going to be worried about certain recommendations to the state that all of a sudden the animal rights people are going to sue, and you have to be sure your data is rigorous enough to withstand court, even though that doesn't matter anymore, as we found with the grizzly bear? Data doesn't seem to matter anymore. So what do? You just simply have something that's defensible and move on?
Yeah, and so our job really is to provide, the data in the best format using contemporary statistical techniques and interpretations, so that we give the state agency the best leg to stand on, so that their decisions are informed and defensible. And it's hard when you've got these social and political challenges associated with something like that. We're focused on the ecological side.
Right.
What recommendations can we make as far as, say, forest management? But you're right. You're totally right. Once it becomes, a peer-reviewed publication and that sort of thing, in my mind, it's kind of difficult, not impossible. It's kind of difficult to challenge some of the stuff once it's made it through that rigorous process.
Mm.
But again, that's not necessarily geared towards all that social and political.
No, not necessarily, nor should it be, because you don't want to. I mean, the data is ultimately going to be what the data is, what you do with it. But do you think that? So, a couple of questions I want to ask here about your information. So, have you found any preliminary findings that you thought were interesting about what you're seeing so far? Is everything what you're expecting? What are you learning about the gray fox that you didn't know before?
That's a good question. We literally, in the central study area, just collared 3 foxes last week, and we haven't had any location downloads. And even so, it'd be just a handful, right?
Yeah.
The southern area, we haven't really had any surprises that I can think of, and we're still waiting to get some disease, and genetics results back from the lab. So it's really early to tell. Having said that, there's 2 things I'll note, and again, this is very preliminary.
Right, we won't hold you to it. It's not. We're just wanting gut reactions here. That's all we got in our industry. So we won't hold you to it.
So all of these foxes have been captured in foothold traps. And I believe 2 have been hindfoot captured, the rest have been frontfoot captured. And this includes coyote-sized foothold traps.
Oh.
So these, that's a big trap for a little gray fox.
It would be, yeah.
And so far, we've had one mortality that we think is capture related, associated with that. It was a hindfoot capture, which we expect not to be. We expect more risk associated with a hindfoot capture, because a gray fox is just a lot more active in a trap than a red fox or a coyote or that sort of thing, generally speaking. So, but we've had 6 that, they're all apparently doing just fine. And we haven't taken any extra precautions. We processed them as if they were caught in a cage trap or something like that. The cage trap isn't foolproof, but as you well know, by any stretch of the imagination. So that's been really interesting. Another thing is on some very preliminary data we've had from one fox, and it really seems to be sticking to the stream corridors. So these are riparian areas that have cover. Again, not a big surprise, but something you would expect and something consistent with what we had expected.
Sure.
So,
and are you getting data on the types of footholds being used? Do you ever ask the trapper to I know it's post hoc. I mean, it would be post hoc data, right? But are you sort of collecting that to see to add to the BMP side of things, to see if there is a modification to some of those coyote traps that could be done to make it a little less impactful on the gray fox?
That is an excellent question. The answer is yes. I put together a form for trappers to receive their payments. $75 per fox that we capture and call and release. Yes, so
that motivates them. Yeah.
And so yes, I actually updated the forms. I ended up contacting the folks related with the first 4 captures. I was like, I want to know what types of footholds these folks are using.
Very good. Yeah.
And they're using high quality footholds, even including the coyote traps. So these are like MB550s, and I think there was one MB450 in there. So I'm still waiting on to hear what some of the others are. And I added that in and asked my field ecologists get the specific information, because we might be able to do something.
So some jaw lamination, because the MB550 has some jaw lamination. So you wonder if that will spread that strike over a little bit larger area for them. Are they offset too? Is there an offset on those MB550s?
Yes, I know the ones that they mentioned were. I think they make a standard jaw MB550, but these were offsets.
And are they allowed to capture gray fox in Indiana, or is these incidental takes?
They are.
They are incidental.
Yep. Until we have solid information that to provide to the Indiana DNR, to my knowledge, they're not going to enact any regulatory changes.
So they're protected right now, essentially.
They're regulated as similar to if they were a red fox, for example. So there's a season on them, and etc. But the interesting thing too is that literally late last week, we had all of our 20 years of BMP data come out in a wildlife monograph published by the Wildlife Society.
Yes,
this is a big deal for the trapping world and the research world, because that's a good thing to rely on when you're putting together a research project showing that these traps have met international humane trap testing standards.
Oh, really? So Europe accepted it?
Well, they accepted those international standards decades ago. So
all right. Well, okay.
We'll see. What that remains to be seen as far as.
Yeah, we know it's likely more due to protectionism under the guise of humaneness, but we won't say that out loud here on our. That would besmirch the character of our European friends. So there's anyway. It's the opinion of some of us. Anyways, some of it just smelled a little fishy, the way these rules went down with their, backing all these muskrats in the Netherlands, So I just find it interesting how the rules are different for people that aren't us. So in any event, but I digress. So what is it? Is there a particular research question that is specifically intriguing you, or is this really just you're doing basic, trying to get the lay of the land research and just sort of see what comes at you? You're out there in the woods having stuff trapped, and all right, what do we extract from this material?
Right, and so it sounds like we were throwing the kitchen sink at it, and that's not totally untrue, because there hasn't been any comprehensive gray fox project like this. Like I mentioned, there's bits and pieces here and there, a lot, no information in a lot of states, especially Midwestern. So it's so hard to compile it. And, even now we think that, a line going through the middle of the United States based off of, glaciation and all that from the past, there's some preliminary work that a colleague, Dr. Dawn Redding at Luther College, is doing, that she's going to publish, to where it looks like there is an eastern gray fox that might be considered as a different species from the western gray fox based off of genetic information that she's put together. And she's one of our project partners. She's really using her genetic expertise, and we're all learning the disease side of things. None of us I consider disease ecologists. And then we also have Jerry Ann Albers from Indiana DNR, the fur bearer biologist, who's obviously an integral component to the project, all full partners on this.
So how many years is this study planned for?
This is 3 years in the field and then 1 year of data analysis. So
This is a big study. Holy cow!
Yeah, it would have made for a PhD and a master's student if we'd gone that route. But I chose to really try and develop professional careers of early career professionals.
Okay.
Put it a roundabout way. So I hired a couple folks that love field work and they're smarter than me. They're not sitting behind a computer all the time, right? So that's what happens when you make a mistake like I did and think you need a PhD.
Okay. Well, let's explore this. So you don't have any students attached to this project here. You don't have any PhD students. This is purely your organization. So no one's degree is on the line here then with this.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And we'll we have one person who may be there for the full duration of the 3 years of field work, and then the other position, depending on their goals, we want this to be. We're in the business of training our future professionals, right?
Right.
And current professionals, even for certain things. So we're gonna give them what they need, and they give us what we need, and we make it a great professional relationship, and keep going on. So this
is some incredible data. You're gonna have 3 years of data collecting with a year of data processing, and so that would assume so you're getting blood samples, you're doing disease, doing probably swabs of the anus, I would guess. Well, looking at their stool, you're looking at that too.
Yep. So that's one thing I didn't mention is we are taking fecal samples and stomach contents for dead foxes, fecal samples as we can for live ones. So that's another whole other component about a diet analysis using DNA.
Right.
So we can try to determine what there's pros and cons to everything. With this, we can look at different types of animal matter and plant matter present and that sort of thing. So
so you're not just looking at macro material, you're getting down to the DNA level, so you're going to know exactly what's in those stomach contents. Where's the money for this? This thing must cost a fortune.
It is a big project. It would make, it's it's as much or more than what's sometimes spent on white-tailed deer for a project.
So that is, and for you in the audience that doesn't know this, white-tailed deer is like the holy grail. That's what keeps a lot of your state agencies afloat. And so you don't touch white-tailed deer. In other states, it's pheasants. And so white-tailed deer is like, that's what keeps those departments going. And so for this level of funding, is this Pittman Roberts?
Exactly.
Funding? Okay.
Yep. So this is based off of excise taxes on firearms and ammunition and that sort of thing. And and Wildlife Ecology Institute, we came up with the 25% non-federal match. So that's very typical. So we waived our indirect costs, which is our operating funds that we would normally get. And I'm actually volunteering all my time on the project to get it going. This is a big deal. So we weren't going to let it go. We were going to do what we needed to do. So,
how many states do you think your data will impact? Will it just be the Midwest? Do you think it will, like Ohio and maybe some other states that are nearby? Or do you think this will have national impact in terms of how analogous will the information be for other states?
Well, that's a great question. I think most all, if not all, of the objectives associated with this project will be directly applicable to the entire Midwest. There's going to be components that are going to be important throughout the U.S. There's going to be the gray fox goes down into South America, so there's going to be, folks in that part of the world, beyond the United States that's going to be interested in perhaps some of the disease components and that sort of thing as well. So
yeah, I mean, I'm just seeing, just off the cuff, five publications right off the, first you have just publishing the data, the raw data you got in, then you have the stomach content data, the species analysis, home range analysis, life cycle, probably reproductive rate, where they're nesting, where their home range is. I'm like, wow, this is going to be, you guys are going to be writing for a while.
Yeah, a year might not be enough, but we might try and keep things going before that. Plus, we do have a component about denning in pups. So when we during springtime when we have a cluster of points in a really tight area, we're going to go in there and look for den sites and attempt to capture the pups and put trail cameras on, take some DNA samples, ear tag them, and that sort of thing. So, and those types of things, that's relatively novel, at least for gray foxes. So we're, that our first year is going to really be a pilot year for how we might try and get that done.
So you started this season, I would assume, this trapping season. So we're looking at, so it'd be 2021, 2022, 2023, and then you start, that'd be your 3 years. Is that about right?
And I believe our field work ends December 2023, I believe.
23, okay. So that's, wow, that's a massive project. Mm-hmm. That is just amazing.
Yeah, and also related to trapping, we are cage trapping as we can. It's taken a while to secure some permits, for example, from the National Forests, Hoosier National Forest, in that system. It's just the way it is, and we're waiting till after firearms deer season before we really get into that. Just for
any challenges you see in the cage trapping gray fox?
Not compared to we finished up a cage trapping project on Sierra Nevada red foxes in Oregon, and most, if not all, the people listening are going to know what cage trapping a red fox, at least a non-urban one, might be like. But
okay,
grays, it shouldn't be near an issue with gray foxes.
So, what size traps are you using for that? What planning to use for that?
So we've got two different styles. I've kind of got the less expensive, 12 by 12 by whatever they are, 30 or
32, so the raccoon size trap. Okay.
Yep. And that's from a previous project I had on kit foxes in Oregon. Yep. And then we've got a bunch of cam trip cages out of California, which they come in a nested set of 4, so they slide in. You can carry 4 at a time, and they're 36 inches deep, and they vary in size from, they're tall and they're narrow. So they're made for
like boxing. A cat. Yeah, like a cat. Okay.
Exactly. And trappers are just ingenious and resourceful. So that was in response to some of the bans on footholds and what they call body gripping traps.
Right,
so
right.
Footholds and conibears and stuff in California. And, those traps have gained a lot of momentum over the years. So I've got quite a few of those in inventory now, and we're using those on areas where there's less chance of theft.
So what are you using for bait?
Well, we're starting out with some commercial baits, mostly gray fox oriented, gland lure and gray fox urine and stuff like that. So we're going to be modifying that as we go and trying different things if we need to. But I'm not a real proponent of, in general, of, okay, this bait's not working, let's try another bait. To me, there's rarely this magic bait that's just going to do the trick every time. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But we put trail cameras on these too, so we can see some of the behavior. And if we have for example, we've got a couple cages near someone's house out in the country because they have foxes coming in because they're throwing scraps out in the yard.
Oh.
Well, what's the best thing to do as long as the state buys off on it is, okay, have them stop feeding the scraps, at least loosely, and put them in the trap. So,
right.
Just quick adaptation of stuff like that if it's agreeable by everybody.
Yeah, I would be interested in in whether you're noticing any type of refusal behavior if the fox is feeling the cage on their feet. If odor on the trap becomes an issue, I would be interested in whether, does a trap capture better if a previous fox has been in it versus not, those types of questions. And of course, always location matters. I mean, it doesn't, if you don't have a good location, you're
there's nothing,
right. You're totally wasting your time. But I'm interested in some of those types of things, whether it works better with a cover or even a 2-door trap. Would there be less refusal if there's if it's a see-through, like a Comstock trap? And so those, I don't know if anyone has answers to those questions yet.
Yeah, and I've tried to really minimize my biases growing up, trapping over the past, 4 decades or so. Geez, can't believe it's been that long. But and some of these things I think might be a bit unnecessary, but we do things to try and increase capture probability, right? Because
Right.
we're there to capture foxes. If we need to put dirt cover over the mesh on the wire cage, we're going to do it. We do cover it, or at least put it back in some shrubs and stuff for protection from,
Okay.
whether it be, raptors or predators or exposure to, the elements or what have you.
Right.
So we generally just covered at least with some brush or something.
Yeah, it would just be, and I think you're right. And see, my challenge is I'm so used to an urban trapping environment that I just not sure whether, because I've been talking with trappers who are, Montana is not even, it's not even rural, it's frontier, they're calling it. So you just wonder whether you're going to have a little bit more refusal with such a strange object. In an urban area, they're seeing strange objects all the time, I think. So, what's the difference between concrete and a little bit of cage, right? But in terms of out here, there's not as much concrete, and the animal knows he's in an urban area versus when he's out in a farm area. And I'm just trying to process that, and so we don't have good data, right? We have all this anecdotal stuff. We don't have any real data as to say, does it matter? Does it not matter? And so I would be intrigued in some of your findings, even if it's a general sense. At least you have more data than what people have than their gut feeling.
Well, there's an interesting analogy in the fur bear world too. There's a lot going on in the Western U.S. about beavers and translocations and restoration and benefits for biodiversity, and that's all great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But these, when beavers are translocated or moved to a new area for the purposes of restoration, they're often these problem beavers that come from urban areas. And so I've talked to quite a few folks that, with state agencies that have been doing this. None of them have ever said that matters one bit. You take a city beaver, and maybe it was never even a dam builder, and you put it in a different area where it's either build a dam or die.
Right.
It seems like they're building dams. They seem like, and for lack of a better term, the inherent motivation of a beaver is going to be probably a little different than a gray fox, because they hear running water, they want to do something about it.
Yeah, but it's good to know that the beaver has that, the instinct is so strong that putting it back into a quote unquote natural environment it still has a chance to survive.
Right,
and so
exactly.
So now the question is that the same for gray fox? I mean, I'd probably think the biggest threat for a gray fox would be cars in an urban area, as opposed to that's probably the biggest thing, or maybe big dogs, I guess, would chase it probably too, depending. But I don't know. Well, I'm excited about this research. I hope that everyone in the audience certainly is. Why don't you give people that phone number?
Yes.
It's for Indiana only, folks. So if you're in another state, we're great, but it's not really for that. It's for people trapping in Indiana who catch a gray fox. Go ahead.
Yep. So the Gray Fox Project hotline is area code 812-343-8350, and that's specific to the counties of Orange, Crawford, Perry, and Harrison in the south part of the state. And in our central study site, it's specific to Shelby, Bartholomew, and Decatur. That doesn't mean you can't call, about something else like a carcass. We are buying carcasses, skinned or unskinned, for $25 each. Those can come anywhere from the state. You can pick up a roadkill for us if it's safe to do so. Don't put yourself in harm's way.
There you go.
So it's also good for that. And within Indiana, we also have our gray fox observation system to report online. So you can go to wildlifeecology.org, and you can go to current research, and then the very top one is our Gray Fox Project in Indiana. And you can scroll down and fill out the information there for, if you saw one, you can give a description, contact information. We'll put it in our database. And thank you very much. If you've got trail cam photos or something like that, there's a method to attach it. And so all that information is very valuable. Any kind of, if you ask anyone who's a researcher, more data is better, because you you don't have to use it, but it's there because you sometimes think of some great things or see some patterns afterwards that you wouldn't have known otherwise.
Yeah, and by the way, everybody, cell phone photos are great because there's GPS associated with it. So if you take a picture of a gray fox with your cell phone, that can be gold because they would know exactly where you took that photo, which could be very helpful for them to model how gray fox are across the state. So this is your opportunity to do a little citizen science without having to spend a whole lot, right? So you can, and if you pick up a road carcass, again, be careful. $25 is $25, and you're also contributing to a project that can really help a species we don't really know a whole lot about. And I hope that everyone, cares about these species because it's part of our livelihood, and we should enjoy these natural creatures because they're really neat and they're part of the environment that we have, and we want to keep it around. That's part of our job. So, well, Dr. Hiller, we really appreciate you being with us today. Let me just give you your title again, Tim Hiller, Executive Director of the Wildlife Ecology Institute based in Helena, Montana. You can visit him and learn more at wildlifeecology.org. And again, for those of you out in Indiana who are encountering gray fox, definitely take some pictures. Try to help out if you see a carcass and can grab it safely. Reach out to we'll put the phone number here on the podcast as well. Thanks so much, and we would love to have you come back next year when you have some of that preliminary first year data to see where things are going and what the gray fox are telling you out there. So thank you so much for being part of the Pest Geek podcast here.
I greatly appreciate it.
All right. Well, everyone, this is Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant, giving you another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast. Hey, don't forget to take some time to subscribe. Also, if you have ideas for topics you'd like to have in the Pest Geek podcast, reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And always remember, we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.